The Colonel's Reluctant Heart. Chapter 1. The Reluctant Guardian. It rained the morning Colonel Nathaniel Harcourt came home. The sky hung low and pewter, hedgerows dripped, and the road's ruts brimmed with brown water that slapped the carriage wheels in weary rhythm. He had imagined, somewhere between bivouacs and billets, that returning to England would present an instant of quiet so complete he could cup it in his hands. Instead, Harcourt Hall received him with the dull shine of old brass and the scrape of the latch that had spoken his name since childhood. "Colonel," said Bristow, the butler, more lined and courtly than Nathaniel remembered. "Welcome home, sir. There is a letter. It is from Lord Ashcombe. A black seal. The crest he knew, even in the rain's dim, the hand unsteady with illness or haste." Nathaniel carried it into the library, set his gloves on the desk, and stood a moment before the cold hearth, as if the room could be warmed by the notion of a fire. He broke the seal carefully. "My dear Harcourt, if this reaches you, I am gone. Fever has done its work. There is a favour I dare to ask, not because you owe me, but because you are the man I trust. Be guardian to my sister Phoebe. She is brave and clever and much too inclined to believe she needs no one. Ashcombe is damaged. There are jackals. Save what can be saved. Save her. Forgive me. You were my brother in arms. Be my brother once more. Julian Ashcombe." A clean line of duty fastened around Nathaniel's chest, painful and familiar. He had kept men alive by making choices no one else would claim. He could keep a promise now that cost him only peace. 3 days later, he reached Ashcombe Manor through a drizzle that turned the ivy slick and dark. The house had good bones and poor flesh, peeling paint, a mist pane in a gallery window patched with oiled paper, a fountain coughing green. Inside, beeswax and lavender fought gently with damp. He was shown to the library, where a young lady stood at the tall window with a letter open in her hand. She turned as the door closed. Lady Phoebe Ashcombe had the kind of poise that is not learned from books. Chin level, shoulders set, eyes steady. Grief had hollowed her cheeks a little, but not her will. "You are Colonel Harcourt," she said. "My brother spoke often of you." She swallowed once, the motion as precise as a stitch. "He did not say he meant to put me in a pen." "Pen?" Nathaniel repeated. "Guardian is a softer word," she returned, a ghost of humour at one corner of her mouth. "It changes little." "Lady Phoebe," he said quietly, "your brother asked me to help you put Ashcombe right. If I could return Julian to you, I would. I cannot. I can do this." She regarded him for a heartbeat longer than comfort allows. "Very well, Colonel. If you are to be my jailer, you must first see the prison." They sat at the desk. She laid the estate books before him with the frankness of despair that has had enough of disguises. Rents in arrears, repairs deferred, an expensive roof lifted and relaid badly 2 summers ago, the steward timid, the tenants tired, the dairy tolerable only because the cows were practically saints. It was not ruin, it was a steady slide. "You have done much," Nathaniel said at last. "Most women would have drowned under this." She gave a small, wry shrug that tugged at his heart. "I have kept my head above the water by looking at the shore and refusing to notice the waves." "Then we will build a better jetty," he said. "It is not beyond mending." Her eyes flicked over him, his scar at the jaw, the controlled economy of his movement, the soldier's neatness he could not shake. "You speak as though the world were a tent to be struck and raised again." "Many things are," he answered. "The trick is to decide quickly where to hammer the first peg." From the next morning, he hammered pegs. He walked fields with the steward, Mr. Milway, whose mildness concealed a conscience that had been starved for permission to be just. He inspected the failing south roof, counted sound timbers with his palm and ear, and bullied the contractor who had cut corners into making amends at cost. He stood in the yard and listened to the smith complain about iron prices and to the milkmaid praise the new heifer's temper. He asked names and used them. He did not speak more than required, and never less than needed. Phoebe rode at his side and did not trail. She wore a plain pelisse, kept her hair pinned with a formidable efficiency Mrs. Baines, the housekeeper, approved, and knew where every lane went, and which widow at the East Rise would not accept charity unless it pretended to be a loan. She did not simper at tradesmen, nor startle at their blunt talk. When a timid mare flung her head against the halter and rolled its eyes, Phoebe laid a palm to the soft groove beneath the ear and murmured nothing that Nathaniel could hear. The creature steadied as if remembering how to breathe. "That was unwise," he said afterwards, half stern, half gratified. "So is walking," she returned, "if one considers the arrangement of bones. Your safety is my responsibility." She tilted an eyebrow. "And my freedom is mine." He meant to be the man her brother believed him. He had not meant to notice the way sunlight picked out coppery threads in her hair, or how her laughter, rare but genuine, altered a room. He had not meant to think of her at night, when the crash of the sea he had known abroad sometimes woke him. He had not meant any of it. By Advent, small improvements declared themselves stubbornly. Drains did their work. The kitchen garden returned carrots so straight, Mrs. Baines displayed them like trophies. Milway refused 2 over-lenient leases, and in doing so taught 3 tenants that fairness is not the enemy of kindness. Gossip, which is never unemployed, wrinkled its nose at such earnestness and invented a simpler story. The Colonel and the lady, the rain and the ivy, a house too silent and a chaperone too deaf. "You should be seen," Nathaniel said one morning, as they reviewed accounts over tea. "Let them see you respectably, in company, with all the lamps lit and half the county watching. It kills invention." "You propose," Phoebe murmured, "that I be both observed and unremarkable. It is difficult to achieve both. Then at least let us attempt respectably remarkable." He held her gaze, and because he could not help it, added lightly, "Ashcombe has not held its Christmas ball in 3 years. She froze, then smiled, not prettily, decisively. "Very well, Colonel. If we are to be judged, let it be over music and cake." The house woke. Floors glowed under wax. Crystal chimed, a seamstress from the village set to remaking a white satin gown that had been her mother's. Phoebe refused new fripperies. "The roof, Colonel," she said when he objected. "I cannot dance under it if it fails." "The roof is mended," he replied. "Dance." On the night itself, guests poured out of coaches in clouds of breath and chatter. The chandeliers hung like crowns of light. The musicians tuned. Evergreen garlands turned the air balsamic. Nathaniel stood at the foot of the staircase and told himself he watched for mischief. In truth, he watched the landing. Phoebe appeared dressed in white satin and pearls. She looked, he would think of it later, honest, not angelic, not ethereal, simply herself, made radiant by being seen. When she reached him, he managed, "You will turn every head in the room." "Yours as well?" she said, smiling, and before he could answer, a smooth baritone intruded. "Lady Phoebe, you eclipse the season." Lord Lucian Faversham bowed with a grace that had practised itself before mirrors. His reputation wandered before him like perfume, handsome, charming, solvent again after a foreign tour whose stories did not bear close inspection. Nathaniel, who had learned to read men's eyes in less forgiving arenas, saw nothing in Faversham's that stayed one place for long. Through the evening, Faversham was too near too often. He kept the proprieties and trespassed on the spirit of them. He laughed at the edge of Phoebe's jokes as though they were his. He won 3 hands of whist and lost the 4th theatrically. Nathaniel watched and disapproved, and because disapproval is not a language that can swoon on a terrace, he took the air alone. Phoebe found him there under a moon as thin as a coin. "You are angry." "Concerned," he corrected. You dislike him. I distrust him. You distrust being outflanked, she said, amusement in her voice, and he moves like water on polished floor. Water floods. She looked away. You presume a right to warn me. I presume a duty. Your brother. Yes, she said quietly. My brother. She drew her shawl closer. You are very good at duty, Colonel. It makes you fierce. And you, he returned, are very good at freedom. It makes you reckless. They stared at one another until the music indoors broke the silence, a waltz with the delicate ache of longing trained into order. Phoebe turned back toward the light. Come, Colonel, she said. Let us be remarkable and respectable. He did neither. He watched her be both and felt the ache take root. Chapter 2. Whispers and Waltzes. Snow came soft and early, muffling the lanes and clarifying the air. Work did not pause. Nathaniel's habits, lists, early rides, unshowy remedies, settled over the manor like a new rhythm the servants could keep. Phoebe's habits, visits to cottages, letters written, small decisive promises kept, wove into that rhythm like melody. They disagreed twice over method and once over money. Each yielded once. Mrs. Baines, who treated both with the brusque affection reserved for the deserving, said privately to Milway that Ashcombe was becoming itself again. Society, which has an appetite that does not blunt in winter, pressed closer. The vicar's wife gave a tea at which the cakes were very good and the questions very pointed. A neighbour invited them to a snowbound charade and contrived that Nathaniel and Phoebe be drawn as stern guardian and wayward ward, a clever cruelty that earned its author a cool bow and nothing more. 3 proper suitors called. Mr. Carfax had 3 virtues: an income of 4,000, a tidy hand, and a manner that never frightened horses. He also spoke of turnips for 20 minutes and proposed by letter as if tendering for a bridge. Phoebe declined with warmth and clarity. His gratitude was touching. Sir Alistair Netherton possessed a mane of hair and the confidence of a man whose tailor understands him. He danced beautifully, quoted poetry inaccurately, and suggested, without quite saying, that a union between them would be good for the county. Phoebe suggested, with perfect kindness, that the county could pursue the match unaided if it wished it so. He laughed and rode away to a better opportunity. Mr. Lacey, heavy with acres and opinions, endured 2 visits with courtesy, and then declared over syllabub that he could forgive a spirited woman. If forgive is required, Phoebe said, it is not a match. He went red and then reassured himself that she would see sense later. You enjoy refusing them, Nathaniel observed, more sharply than he intended. I enjoy remaining myself, she answered, not unkindly. You might remain yourself in company with a man of sense. Oh, certainly, she said, if one called who recognized the distinction. He almost said, I recognize it, and then understood that duty would not let him finish the sentence. He considered that perhaps duty, noble creature that it was, had become a curtain he hid behind because the day was too bright. Lord Faversham returned in a flurry of compliments and absent delicacy. He sent roses out of season that glowed indecently in Mrs. Baines's tidy morning room. He offered a drive in a sober curricle. He said nothing that could be nailed down, everything that could waft. People liked him. People who did not like him liked liking him. You must trust me to know my own mind, Phoebe told Nathaniel after a dinner in which Faversham told a story about Vienna that made the dowager at the head of the table sniff and the debutante at the foot blush. I do, Nathaniel said. He did, but he trusted his reading of Faversham more. You wish to forbid me. I wish to spare you. Her lips quirked. And leave me with nothing to do? No, Colonel. I will be careful. You shall be patient, and we will both try not to scowl. On 12th night, the village feast filled the schoolroom with steaming boots and red fingers. Phoebe drew tickets for hams and blankets. Children stared at her as if she were the patroness of warmth. Faversham arrived late with a story about a lame horse that grew more charming with each telling. He stood just behind Phoebe's shoulder as she called number 27. Nathaniel, across the room, caught his eye. Faversham smiled and bowed a fraction. Nathaniel inclined his head. War had taught him many languages. This was one of them. 3 days later, the magistrate's boy arrived at Ashcombe with a message. A footman dismissed from Faversham's household had been caught attempting to sell letters purporting to be Phoebe's. The contents were indecent in the precise way that indecency imagines itself romantic. The hand imitated hers without capturing its impatient neatness. The price named suggested a seller who believed mud could be turned to coin if thrown long enough. By the time Nathaniel reached the market town, the letters were under lock and the seller under ale. Nathaniel paid the constable to see both beyond temptation and rode home with proof and fury in his coat. Phoebe stood by the drawing-room fire, still as a standard. "I did not write them," she said before he spoke. "I know. He called yesterday," she went on. "He proposed, coolly. When I refused, he told me it would be a pity to force me to prove my innocence in public." "Force you," Nathaniel repeated, feeling the word like grit in his mouth. She met his eyes. "You cannot fight him." "I can. He will make more scandal from a duel than from forged letters." "He will not dare." Nathaniel turned. "No," Phoebe said. "Please." A single plea, bare of pride, costlier than argument. He paused because she had said please. He left because he could not bear that she had needed to say it. At dawn, in a white field beyond the quarry, Nathaniel stood 15 paces from Faversham and measured the wind. Milway, white-faced, clutched a handkerchief he did not need. Faversham looked pale, but untroubled, a gambler who understood odds and reputations. The seconds called. 2 reports tore the air. Faversham's ball grazed Nathaniel's arm. Nathaniel's shattered a hawthorn twig above Faversham's head deliberately. He had never intended to kill. He preferred his enemies alive and shamed. Before noon, Faversham was on the London road trailing apologies. Before evening, the county knew the letters were false and the lady vindicated. Vindication does not cancel fear. Fever came for Nathaniel's wound, not because it was grave, but because winter and fury make poor surgeons. He lay 3 nights while delirium unwound old battles into the ceiling's cracks. Phoebe watched with the composure of those who have learned that panic saves no one. "Why?" she asked on the 3rd morning, when he came back cleanly to the room. "Why would you risk—" "Duty," he managed. It sounded narrow and insufficient in the quiet. "Is that the only word you own?" she whispered. He thought of a plane under a sky the colour of iron and men who had lived because he had worn duty like armour. "It is the one that kept others breathing," he said. "Then find another for yourself," she returned very gently, "or you will spend your courage on other people's accounts and never your own." He healed. Faversham's name went out of use like a coin withdrawn. The world pretended nothing had happened because it had so enjoyed pretending that something had. Phoebe withdrew a little into herself, not with drama, but with care. Gratitude is a wall, and she did not wish to keep him always on the other side of it. Nathaniel understood, which did not ease him. One evening at the library window, he said, "I am summoned to London. A formal discharge." "Your escape," she said, not turning. "My duty," he answered, because he did not yet know how to say my fear. "Go," she murmured. "It is what men of honour do when they cannot bear to be loved." He stared at the back of her head and left before dawn because he could not bear to find out whether she was right. Chapter 3. What Duty Would Not Say. London sat in April like a fidgeting child, restless for warmth. Nathaniel completed the ritual of paperwork and thanks, receiving the kind of public gratitude that puts a layer of glass between the honoured and those who honour. Men he liked told him to garden. Men he did not like advised him to marry. He walked the parks and found himself attentive to shades of green that had not mattered in uniform. He tried to write to Phoebe twice and burned both drafts, hearing duty correct every sentence until each read like a report. He visited a bookseller and nearly followed a woman in a blue pelisse whose stride had the frank decisiveness of someone he loved. He ate dinners at which other officers spoke of the past because it was safer than the present. He attended a sermon about the woman who broke an alabaster box over holy feet, and when the curate said, "waste," Nathaniel had to close his eyes not to answer, "No, love." He gave himself a week to be sensible. On the 7th day, the sensible thing he could not do stood aside for the necessary thing he could. He hired a post-chaise and went home by a road he took as a boy when he wanted to arrive breathless and proud. Ashcombe lay in a wash of late sun and lilac scent. The fountain had recovered its voice. The terrace stone held the day's warmth. Phoebe stood at the balustrade, hands on the rail, gaze west. She turned before he spoke as if the air had announced him. "Colonel Harcourt." "Lady Phoebe." He took off his hat and the old armour with it. "I have come to resign my guardianship." A paleness of shock, then something like relief moved under her poise. "Indeed. I have no commission now. There is nothing to shield you from, nothing to shield me with." He searched for the words she had demanded. "You asked me to find another word than duty." "I did. Love. I love you. I do not know how to make the speech better. I only know I would rather fail in your company than succeed anywhere else." She breathed once, deeply, as though she had been underwater. "You are late, Colonel," she said, a tremor of laughter in it. "I am," he agreed. "Forgive me." "I will," she answered and crossed to him. "On one condition." "Name it." "That you never again call me your duty when you mean your choice." "I swear it," he said, and her hands were in his, and the world was suddenly sized correctly. They told Mrs. Baines, who sat down hard and then rose to issue a series of instructions that reordered the cosmos. They told Milway, who flushed, shook Nathaniel's hand vigorously, and went to the steward's room to cry in private. They told no one else, and therefore everyone knew within 2 days. They married in June when the linden trees were heavy with bees. The bells rang until the rope broke and was knotted and rang again. Phoebe wore ivory. Nathaniel, at Mrs. Baines's request, and to the village boys' delight, wore his regimentals once more. When they emerged to sunshine and petals, Nathaniel, who had stood under cannon without blinking, blinked. They drove north for a week, to a plain inn near a Roman road. Phoebe had not seen the straight mile that argues across the moor, and Nathaniel had never walked beside a stream without counting how many men it could water. They did both. They learned each other's offhand habits. She counted steps on staircases unconsciously. He rarely used the back of a knife for butter. They discovered that happiness reduces the need for vows to the simplest. I am here, so am I. They returned to Ashcombe and to the work that had never stopped waiting. Marriage rearranged nothing essential and everything else. They now disagreed as partners, which made their quarrels more effective and their reconciliations easier. Phoebe's strong opinions met Nathaniel's in rooms where maps and accounts covered tables and laughter came uninvited. When the vicar suggested a larger font for the schoolroom, Nathaniel measured the roof. When Mrs. Baines demanded crockery be replaced for symmetry, Phoebe found a compromise that retained the cracked plate because it had belonged to a maid's mother. News of Faversham arrived the way the sea sends up a glass bottle now and then, curious and without obligation. He had married a widow with a small fortune and a large talent for conversation. He looked well in town and bored in Bath. Nathaniel placed the letter on the mantel, then into a drawer, then into the fire. He did not speak of it. One cannot rebuild a house by describing the ash. The estate improved. The well in the northern meadow went down through stubborn clay to good water. The school's library grew with books that had been loved before and would be loved again. A girl who wrote a bold hand was apprenticed to the attorney because Phoebe had sat with his wife and simply refused to stop talking until the lady, laughing, said, "Very well, send the girl." Nathaniel taught 3 boys to read afield and a 4th to hold a plough's line straight. He walked the land morning and evening and found his breath falling into the cadence of home. On an October afternoon, they stood in the barn awash in lantern light and stew steam for the harvest supper. Nathaniel watched Phoebe cross the floor with a pie and thought, with a clarity that startled him, "I have commanded soldiers, and this is more difficult and more joyful." A labourer caught his eye and lifted a mug. Nathaniel lifted his own back and knew the gesture meant more than ale. At year's end, Christmas came round again, and with it music. The ball was smaller, friendlier. Scandal had been replaced by the more durable gossip of who overstewed the carrots and who had grown very fond of the new curate's hair. They danced once together, laughing when Nathaniel missed a turn, and he said into her hair, "I will never be graceful." "You are steady," she said. "It is better." After the guests left, they walked through the long gallery with its portraits of men whose wigs had opinions. The moon laid pale rectangles on the floor. Phoebe stopped at the window where he had once told her he was leaving. "Do you remember," she asked, "how I accused you of running away?" "I do." "You were not," she said. "You were only not ready to stay." He turned her hand in his and brought it to his mouth. "I am ready. Not only now, every morning." Chapter 4. Choosing Peace. Peace, it turned out, was not silence. It was the low chorus of necessary things: boots in the hall, voices in the yard, the thud of logs, the creak of the dairy door, the scratch of quill on good paper. Nathaniel had imagined peace as an empty room in which he could think uninterrupted. He learned to prefer the room in which someone might walk in. They began a small practice of telling each other one small truth each day that did not belong to work. He told her he feared storms less than stillness. She told him she counted the swallows each spring from the stable eaves. He told her he had once wished not to survive because he could not bear the weight of those who had not. She told him she had once thought independence meant solitude and now understood it meant choosing company. These truths did not end anything. They made everything easier. Trouble visited as it must. A tenant fell into drink and fell behind. Phoebe argued for time, Nathaniel for principle. They discovered a third path that required the man to work for the estate and paid him in bread and boots and pride until the bottle seemed less useful than the plough. A roof failed in a storm and the repairer charged twice. Nathaniel went to town and did not raise his voice, but raised the price paid to a fair one. Phoebe's aunt sent a letter suggesting that town would remember her more kindly if she came to be seen. Phoebe replied with such graceful defiance that the aunt wrote back a blessing wrapped in amusement. Bristow visited, declared himself too old to travel, and then made the journey in half the time anyone expected. He inspected the pantry, wept in the library, and told Nathaniel in confidence that Mrs. Baines was formidable in the only way worth fearing. Phoebe fed him broth and stories. He left fatter and younger. In spring, they walked to the Roman road and watched larks climb the invisible ladder of their song. Nathaniel said, "There was a time I believed only the straight way true." Phoebe said, "There was a time I believed only the wild way free." They agreed that both are necessary, and that the art is knowing which is required by which day. One summer evening, returning from a round of calls, Phoebe found Nathaniel in the orchard mending a gate. He looked up, a curl escaped behind his ear, and smiled as if he were surprised by the sight of joy crossing the grass toward him. She stopped to memorize it. "Do you know," she said later as they sat with lemonade under the pear tree, "I used to think I must be extraordinary to be safe." "You are extraordinary," he said at once. "I am," she agreed, grinning, "but it is not what keeps me safe. Being loved does." He did not argue with theology that worked. In autumn, a fever went through the village. Nathaniel rode to each cottage with the surgeon. Phoebe followed with broth and clean linen, and an insistence on fresh air that risked scandal and saved lungs. They lost an old man who had long been ready to go and kept 3 children who were not. At the burial, Phoebe stood between 2 widows and did not speak. The vicar said later it had been the best sermon. On a late winter night, when the wind came down from the moor like a blunt knife, Nathaniel woke and could not sleep. He went to the library, stirred the coals, and sat with a blank sheet before him. He wrote to Julian Ashcombe, "Old friend, I kept my promise. I did not know it would keep me. Your sister is exactly as you said, and more than you knew. The estate mends. I learn peace. I did not know a man could be proud of quiet things. I do not deserve any of this more than another, which makes me think deserving is a poor measure. If you can see down from whatever good height they put brave men, know we are well. Your Nathaniel." He sealed the letter and put it in the drawer where he kept what could not be sent. The next morning, Phoebe found him there and read the lines with her fingertips. "He would be satisfied," she said. "Do you think so? I think you have made something he would recognize as home." In March, the first lambs stumbled into their soft astonishment. Nathaniel and Phoebe leaned on the fence and laughed, because it is impossible not to laugh at lambs. In April, the lilac threw scent against the house. In May, the schoolchildren ran races on the lawn, and Milway cheated by clapping at the right moment. In June, they walked, as on the year before, out of church hand in hand, and felt the bells as blessing rather than noise. On an evening soft with bees, they stood again on the terrace where he had told her he loved her, and she had told him he was late. The sun was low, turning stone honey-coloured. The fountain, reformed at last, performed modestly. "Do you regret anything?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "that I made you wait." She looked up. "You made yourself wait as well." "I did," he admitted, and put his arm around her. "I am done with that." They watched swallows score the sky and considered the many small ways in which days add to days to make a life. He thought of duty and found that love had not dismissed it, but given it a new commission, to keep. She thought of freedom and found that love had not leashed it, but taught it directions. "Tell me one small truth," she said, their habit still dear. "I like the way you write the figure 7, he said, surprising himself. She laughed. "And I like the way you say we." "We," he repeated, tasting the word as if it were new. Below, the meadow drew its green breath. Above, the first star approved. Inside, the long case clock took up its old patient counting. They stayed a little while longer, because they could, because home is not a place, but a shared pause. And when at last they went in, it was not because the night was cold or the lamps were low, but because there was bread to slice and a letter to answer, and a tomorrow to be met with the same steady courage that had brought them here. 2 people who had chosen, once and then again each day, the kind of love that holds without binding and frees without letting go. The end. If you've enjoyed this story of love, redemption, and quiet courage, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you'll be the first to hear our next Regency romance on the Regency Gazette channel. Thank you for listening.